Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Carlos Alberto Molina Rodríguez, estudiante de la licenciatura en Diseño Gráfico y Animación Digital por la Universidad Autónoma de Tamaulipas. El siguiente video es para presentar un trabajo de la unidad 4 de la materia de inglés técnico, donde se hablará sobre la historia de las corrientes artísticas a través del tiempo. As an introduction, I would like to mention that the artistic movements mentioned in this video correspond to post-Renaissance movements, since it's until this time that realism and techniques in painting lose their prominence role to give a boost or a push to the creativity and experimentation. Okay, let's get started with this review. The first movement that we're going to talk is Baroque, and it's a form or art and architecture that it was very popular in Europe during the 17th and the early 18th centuries. This type of art, it was very ornate, dramatic, and realistic. It's very popular also to see this style in some architecture in Mexico. Some of the painters who belong to this movement are Caravaggio and Rembrandt. Also, the Palace of Versailles near to Paris is considered to be the greatest example of Baroque architecture. Of all the movements that we're going to talk about, the Baroque is the only with typical elements of the art of the Middle Age, like the religious themes and the use of high contrast in painting. Okay, the next movement that we are going to talk is Impressionism. It's a style developed in France during the late 19th century, and the Impressionists tried to capture an immediate visual interpretation of their subjects by using color rather than lines. This particular movement, to me, it was very important in the art history because it was the beginning of exploring new techniques, and it was very loose about the technique. They take a different perspective of painting, and in this new style of painting, the light it was more important to capture the essence of an image that the realisms. Some examples that painters that belong to this movement are Claude Monet, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and Edgar Degas. The post-impressionists followed the impressionists. The movement originated in Paris and it was very popular in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. The main point of this movement, it was also rebelled against the reality of the painting, and it was more important to create an emotional and personal work. Some of the painters that belong to this movement are Vincent van Gogh and Paul Gauguin. Okay, the next movement that we are going to talk is Cubism. That it's a style of art that push basic and abstract geometric forms and shapes that often are represented from many angles at the same time to create a very unique perspective of painting. One of the most famous painters in the world was Pablo Picasso, who belongs to this movement, and I really like him for his Guernica painting, which he did as a protest against the Franco government in Spain. The next movement that we're going to talk is Romanticism, that it's a style of art that it was very popular in the early 19th century. Romantic artists produce emotional works that portray an idealized world and nostalgia from the past. Some of the painters that belongs to this movement are Francisco Goya, William Blake, John Constable, and Eugene Delattre. And one of the characteristics of this style was the use of dark colors to create an atmosphere of nostalgia that personally I don't like it very much because these paintings often make me very sad. Another important art movement was the abstract impressionism. It was a style developed in the middle of the 20th century, and it emphasized form and color rather than an actual subject. Some of the painters that belongs to this movement are Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning. And I don't particularly like this type of art since many times it seems to me more like an accident than a painting with an intention behind. The next movement that we're going to talk is pop art. That is one of my favorite styles, and it was a movement that emerged in England and United States after 1950s. Pop artists use materials from the everyday world of popular culture, such as comic strips, canned goods, and science fiction. Some of the painters that belongs to this movement are Andy Warhol, that is very famous because he made the portrait of Marilyn Monroe, and Roy Lichtenstein. The next and the last movement that we are going to talk is Surrealist. The Surrealist artists came from all over the world, and the movement was very popular in the 1920s. Some of the painters that belongs to these movements are the Spanish painters Salvador Dali and John Miro, but we can also talk about famous women painters from these movements, such as Leonora Carrington or Frida Kahlo, and another very famous artist from this movement, it was André Breton. Thank you for your attention. I think that's all, and see you soon. Bye.